Well, good afternoon, and it's great to see everybody here. So good to see so many of you interested in coming to hear about our services, and it's really a privilege to be able to talk to you about that. Some of the sharp-eared amongst you may have thought there's some kind of British conspiracy going on here at AWS, considering that Matt is a countryman of mine, but I'm pleased to inform you that there is no such conspiracy. It's total coincidence, and I've lived in the States for quite a while at this point. So my name is Paul Duffy. I'm part of the solution architect team that's based here in New York City. And our job is basically to spend time with customers who are thinking about deploying applications on the AWS cloud and to help them do that in a way that they can take the best advantages of the capabilities that that offers to them. So with that, what I'd like to talk to you about today is how you can use one particular AWS service, Elastic Beanstalk, to better deploy web applications. In today's example, we're going to be talking about PHP applications. So the format of this presentation is going to be a few slides just to give an overview of what Elastic Beanstalk is. Is there anybody here who's used Elastic Beanstalk so far? So not very many of you. So we'll start off giving an overview of what the Elastic Beanstalk service does, what it offers you, go into something of an in-depth demonstration, a little bit of a recap, and then we'll be around. There are a bunch of solution architects from the New York team who are here today. So if you have any questions afterwards, if you want to go into any of the depth, like some of the questions we had at the end of Matt's session, that's what we're here for. We'll be very pleased to go through that stuff. So what is AWS Elastic Beanstalk? Well, it's a service to make it easier for you to deploy applications on the AWS platform. And one of the key things it does is automates the provisioning and configuration of a lot of AWS services. So if you think about some of the things that Matt was talking about in his talk before, he was giving examples of some of the things you might think about when you're deploying an application. How would you make sure that that application was highly available, that it was going to be able to scale out to meet the demand from users? Things like that. How would you configure monitoring using services such as CloudWatch and so on? Or receive notifications based on what's going on in your application? So what Elastic Beanstalk does is takes a lot of that heavy lifting away from you, meaning that you can focus on building the best PHP applications in this case, or perhaps Java applications, and letting us think about that kind of automation, whether it's things like snapshots for application logs, or letting you easily manage those configuration settings. So Elastic Beanstalk, along with one of the themes that Matt talked about at the end of his presentation, is really about taking away some of that undifferentiated heavy lifting. So if you want to take a PHP application, we're going to show you this in the demo with a sample one. If you wanted to take a sample PHP application, deploy it in a highly available way, very, very straightforward how you can do that. So what does it look like? How does it work? Well, you basically create your application. Ultimately, in the example we're doing with PHP, we're going to use Git to push it out into Elastic Beanstalk. And Elastic Beanstalk provisions everything from a DNS name, a CNAME in the Route 53 DNS service, to creating an Elastic Load Balancer, which is our managed load balancing service, to launching those EC2 instances that are going to actually run the PHP code that you've developed, and then doing all the kind of underlying things from a point of automatically scaling, making sure you've always got the right number of instances so that you can achieve the high availability that you require if you do require high availability of your application, and then other things like notifications and alarms so you know what's going on and you can be communicated to. Very easy for you to change those parameters on the fly. We'll look at that in the demonstration. And the other key thing is, although this takes away a lot of the work for you, it doesn't remove access. So when we when we upload an application, we push it out with Git, you can still connect to that underlying EC2 instance and use the same kind of commands you're used to using to manage that. This just makes some of this stuff easier, so you don't have to go and do that auto-scaling work yourself. So if a picture says it's worth 1,000 words, a demo is worth somewhat more, this is going to be something of a longish demo. So before I go into it, I just want to recap what we're going to cover. So we'll have a quick look in the management console, and specifically at the Beanstalk part of the management console. As with many other AWS services that you're used to, everything that you do through the management console here, you could also automate this using the Elastic Beanstalk tools at an API kind of level. We're then going to launch our initial application. And the focus of this session is not on an amazing PHP application. I'm sure there are many of you in the audience who are much better at doing that than I am. The focus is how we can take this sample application, launch it into our dev environment, as we're going to call it, make some code changes that we'll push out there. We're then also going to launch a production environment, so showing how you can very easily have two environments. We're going to have a smaller one for development, another one for our production environment. Then we're going to show you how we can customize that, and then as we finish the demonstration, show how we can very, very simply take an application that isn't highly available and make it highly available without having to do anything more than a few mouse clicks in the console. So with no further ado, we'll start the demonstration now. Let's just make sure you can see this. So here we have the management console, and I've started off in the EC2 tab. I'm not running any instances at the moment because I've shut everything down in my account specifically for the purposes of this demonstration. We're going to go over here to the Elastic Beanstalk tab, and that's where we're going to start the demonstration. So I don't have any Beanstalk applications configured right now, it's telling me. So we're going to start our first application. And this is going to be a 64-bit Amazon Linux one running PHP. So the first thing we need to do is give the application a name. So I'm going to give it a fairly simple name here. AWS NYC demo. Give it a description. Confirm it's 64-bit running PHP. We could upload an application here. I'm just going to use the sample one, which is a kind of a slightly enhanced Hello World one. So once we've created the application container itself, the next thing it's going to ask us for is an environment name. So if you think in the context of this application that we're setting up, we're also going to have multiple environments. So we're going to have a development environment where we might be doing our testing. We're also going to have a production environment which we would later use for production users coming in to our website. So I'm going to call this AWS NYC demo-dev. And it gives me an option here to check the availability of that CNAME. Luckily for us and the demo, it's available. We'll also give that a description. Then it's going to ask me a few more questions. So first of all, what's the instance type I want to choose? So I don't need anything particularly large for my dev environment, so I'm going to choose from this drop-down list here that I want an M1 small. I'm going to put my key pair in, which is what I'll later use if I want to SSH into that instance to configure it. I'm going to put an email address in, which we've got one configured here of AWS NYC demo Gmail. And then the other really interesting thing here is we're going to give it an application health check URL. So this is something that you would define based on how you've deployed your application. You might have a best practice for making sure that that health check URL is only going to be there when you've done some stuff to check the health of your application. So we're going to give it a simple name here of healthcheck.htm. So it's giving us an option here to verify what we've selected. I'm going to click Finish. It'll take a second, and now it's starting to create the application. So what's it actually doing? Well, one of the things that I spoke about with Beanstalk before is this is taking away heavy lifting work from you. But it's not taking away control, and it's not totally abstracting those resources so that you lose control of them. So if we look in the management console here, it's giving us some status. If we look at the handy tab to look at here for the environment details is the Events tab. And that tells us exactly what's going on here. So we scroll down, we can see an SNS topic has been created. We can see that auto-scaling activities have been done. We can see EC2 instances are coming up. If I go into my inbox here, I can see a notification that's come in, automatically being signed up to subscribe to this topic for notifications of what's going on in the environment. So I'm going to confirm my subscription for that. And then back in the console, if we went to look at the EC2 tab here, we're going to see all the things that it's talking about, those instances, security groups, load balancers, and so on, are going to be created. So we'll have a look at those in a second. So we've got one running instance. We'll probably see the instances I was working with before. No, they've gone. So we have our running instance. So that's on the way up. If we went to look at the load balancers here as well, we would see here a load balancer has been created just for this application. So I could have done those things manually. I could have created the auto-scaling launch config. I could have created the auto-scaling groups myself. But this has done that work for me and made it very, very straightforward. So if we go back to Elastic Beanstalk, let's see where that's got up to. And it's probably going to take a couple more minutes before that application is ready for us to do any demonstration with. So in the meantime, I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we're going to do from a deployment point of view with the application. So yeah, this is still doing work with the EC2 instance. What I have on my local machine here, very, very simple, Git repository set up. I'll just make sure we resize this. So into that repository, I'm going to copy the sample PHP, the kind of the base application, which I'm going to modify a little bit later on. So now you can see we've got a couple of files, all pretty basic stuff. When you see this, it's going to be a fairly simple hello world type of application. But then the other thing that's interesting is we're going to do a git aws.config. And this is where we're going to configure Git on my laptop to connect to the service that we're running as part of Elastic Beanstalk. So you're seeing my keys here. Don't worry, they're going to be invalidated by the end of the demonstration, so you're not going to be able to change my application. We're going to have this in the US East region at this point. We don't need to change the host from an AWS point of view. But what we do need to do is, first of all, give it the application name we're going to use, and then secondly, we'll give it the environment name. So we'll verify that we're doing the right thing here. So the application, it's got a P, first initial of my name, and then it's AWS NYC demo. And then we need the environment. So right now, we're going to be pushing our code into the dev environment. Which is dev, and we'll just go back in here to verify AWS NYC demo dev, which is right. And then once that's done, when the environment comes up, it's going to have the application ready. So it'll have the baseline thing there. So we can push some updates to it, which we'll do in a second. So we'll just see where this environment has got to from a timing point of view. So it's still adding that instance, and we can look at the events tab to see exactly what's going on. In the meantime, I'm going to just add those files. Do that in a second. So one thing we can do in parallel here, so the demo environment we've got here, it's giving us some status now. Let's see if it sent us any emails. So it's given us some notifications that it's added EC2 instances to the environment. We only want one at the moment. We're not highly available yet. We've just got one and one small EC2 instance that's running. So it's telling us it's adding that particular instance. And we've got a red now. Any idea why that red icon's there? Yes, very good. Someone said the health check. So deliberately, I don't want my application to be exposed just yet because it's not ready. So in the sample PHP application, there is no health check file built in, and I haven't pushed one up there. So the application health is red because I said to it, I want you to use healthcheck.htm as a health check, and that file doesn't exist at this point. So our application isn't going to be exposed in any kind of half-baked way to people that we don't want to see it. Before we edit the health check, I also just want to show you that if we looked at the EC2 tab of the console and we went to look at this instance, we can see that that instance is running. Let's see if we can connect to it. So we're going to connect with a standalone SSH client. So there's my AMI. There's the underlying EC2 instance, which I can control the way I would do that normally if I went to have a look in the where the HTML is configured. I can see there's an index.php and info.php, very much similar to what I have on my local repository. It's not exposed yet because the health check file's not there. So the next thing we're going to do is push out that health check file. So I'm going to go into my repository here. There is no health check file, so we'll create one. Don't need to put anything in it. Put healthy for now. I'm going to add all that to the repository and commit it. So right now, if we go back into Elastic Beanstalk, just because I want you to see the interaction we're going to see between Git and Beanstalk, here's my environment. It's red. Someone said it was the health check, and we can also see if we look in here, we've got an information message from Beanstalk, which is telling us that our health check might be misconfigured. In this case, it's deliberately misconfigured because we haven't pushed the file up there. So let's change that. So we've pushed that up, and if you look closely at the screen now, you'll see that it's telling us an environment update is starting. So it knows that code's been pushed in, and if we refresh this, it'll tell us, first of all, it's going to take a couple of seconds for all of the EC2 instances. In my case, there's only one, but it's going to take a few moments for the EC2 instances to pull that code down, and then we'll at some point see the application go healthy. So I'll give it a minute or so to, oh, it's gone green already. So we can look at the overview now, start this link, and here we have, congratulations, the basic health check page is there. And if we wanted to make a simple change to that, we go back into our repository, edit the index file, edit this text here. Push that up. And again, if we go back to the management console, we'll see, again, the same update sequence is happening. It's telling us the update is on. It'll take a couple of seconds for the instances to pull the code down. This is going to be slightly more quick than the health check file because there are some more dependencies for the health check than just updating one piece of PHP. This is green now. And if we went back, we'd see the one-word change to that page. So that's our first environment setup for dev. So the next thing we're going to do is launch another environment because we want something a little bit different for our production environment here. So we'll go back into the Beanstalk environment here, and we're going to say launch a new environment. So we have one application here that contains one or more environments. This one we're going to call P AWS-NYC-demo-prod for production. We get the same thing to check the availability of the DNS name. It's available. We're going to give it a description. And for now, we'll choose this. It's going to have the same first release piece of code, and it's going to be PHP. We get some similar choices here about the instance size. I'm going to choose here that I want this to be an M1 large because I've decided based on analysis of my application that I want a larger instance size. The key pair is going to be the same, not necessarily a best practice, but that's what we're going to do for the demo. Put the same email address in and the same health check. So now we've got a second environment launching. We could see the same kind of things if we went to the details there, the events that are going on. It's created a load balancer. It's created notifications. If we go into our email account here, we see a bunch of notifications. Some of them were the results of the deployment that we did before to the dev environment. Others are going to ultimately be a subscription notification. So we've got another subscription here. I'm using the same email address for both environments just because it's a little bit simpler to demo, not something that we would necessarily do in the real world. And we're just going to leave that environment cooking at this point. But while we're doing that, I want to show you some other things in terms of what you can tweak and what you can configure with Elastic Beanstalk. So we know for the dev environment here, pretty simple. We've got one EC2 instance. We've got a load balancer created. Nothing to load balance across from the point of view of more than one instance. We'll show you how you can do that from a high availability point of view in a few moments. But what we can look at doing here is editing the configuration. So one of the things Matt was talking about before were things like load balancers, things like auto-scaling and so on. You can do that. I could have done everything I've showed you today with Elastic Beanstalk myself, but instead all I had to do was to tell it. Ultimately, I wanted a PHP application, what size instances I want, how many of them I potentially want from here, and this will do all of that work. So on the first tab, we have the EC2 instance types that are there, so I could change that, and the environment will be resized for me. I can choose EC2 security groups. I could change the key pair. I could change the AMI that's used. So we have a default AMI, AMIs being our kind of template machines that you launch, from which you launch instances. So we could have a custom AMI. If you had specific customizations related to your application, you could customize that AMI and change that. And if you were using the command line tools, you could do that when you create the environment instead of having to do it later. Some of the other things that we can configure here, the load balancer. So we're not using HTTPS for this website because we don't need to. We can choose our application health check URL here, which is the same for both applications. We could look at stickiness if we needed to do that for the application. One of the really interesting and really powerful things, though, is this auto-scaling tab. So here, right now, I've said the minimum number of instances I want is 1. So we're just going to go with 1 at any one point, unless it scales up for a particular reason. I could choose to have a minimum of 2 if I perhaps wanted to have them balanced for high availability across different availability zones. So right now, I've just chosen to have this deployed in 1 availability zone. And then we also have a scaling trigger. So this, in the case of particular amount of load or demand on your application, the default here is network out. There's a whole bunch of different metrics you could choose. You could base it on CPU utilization and so on. And all those kind of things are going to be based on the profile of your application, which you'll know through the development process. What we're going to demonstrate now, particularly for here, under this container tab, we get some fairly obvious settings like the document root, the memory limit for it, and so on. But what's really interesting here is this environment properties section. So say, for example, our PHP application is going to connect to a back-end database. It might be a MySQL database running on a standalone EC2 instance. It might be an RDS MySQL instance. So how do you pass those kind of parameters through? So one of the things Beanstalk does for you is let you put in some of these parameters here. So I'm going to put in my access key, my secret key. And here, and this is customizable. You need to know how your application is going to handle that on the other side. So I'm going to say that this is dev environment. And say this is the customer database. Here's something interesting here. So you can put those parameters in, and then later you can retrieve them from your application and take advantage of that dynamically. So if we apply these changes, we'll see the same kind of update thing that's going on for the dev environment there. So that'll take a few seconds to complete. So how do we get those environment variables? So here's a sample bit of PHP. And we describe this in our documentation, so it's not complicated. So we can do a get CFG-var in PHP with those names that we define, and then use those parameters as however we might wish to do that. Here, I've built this simple PHP page that's just going to display them. So let's see the environment. Let's see if the environment's ready again. So the environment's ready, but I don't yet have any PHP that's going to do anything with those variables. So what I'm going to do is add that file. So we've add that, push that out. We see the same update happening. We'd be getting an email notification of what's going on. So take a couple of seconds for the EC2, in this case, the one EC2 instance, to pick that up. Let's see if it's back ready. Just take it a moment. And then once that's done, let's see if we can load the environment file. And there we have it. So it's very, very simple. Nothing, no rocket science here from the PHP point of view. But this does mean it's very easy to pass dynamic configuration data straight from either the AWS management console or the Elastic Beanstalk command line tools to then configure your application to talk to a particular database or do something a bit different. So now we've done that, I'm going to do a couple of other things in the console here. So for my production environment, I might not necessarily want to use a CNAME that's pointing something to a name that has Elastic Beanstalk in. I might want to use my regular domain name. So if I went in to look at the EC2 configuration here, I'll find that there's a load balancer that's being created for my production environment as well as my dev environment. So there are two load balancers now. So if I go over to the Route 53, I nearly said routes, but I've just about managed to kick that habit after 7 years. If I went to look at these record sets for this domain that I've got configured here, I'm going to create a record, which I'm going to call NYC demo, NYC-demo for consistency, and say that this is an alias. I'm going to target this to my production load balancer. So my customers coming in now, if they typed in nyc-demo.angora.com, they will go there. We'll create that record. If we go back to Elastic Beanstalk, there's one more thing that we have to do before we're going to be healthy. It's the health check for the production environment, because that's read in the same way that the other one was. So the first thing I have to do is just reconfigure my Git repository, so it's going to push the files out there. So we'll just make some changes here. So I've created a health check file with different wording in this case. I also need to run the config command. So the keys are staying the same, not necessarily a best practice, but for the purposes of this demo, I'm using my standard credentials for this. Same region, same host here. Now remember, the application, the container is the same here. We have two environments inside the container. So for the application, I'm going to put here p aws-nyc-demo-prod. So now we see the same kind of thing that's going to happen in the production environment. Those EC2, that one EC2 instance is going to go and get that code. And then shortly we'll see that this environment is healthy. So in the meantime, now that we've kind of got our dev environment and we've got the production environment ready as well, and we've successfully pushed code out there, what we're going to do is change the configuration for the dev environment, because I've decided now that we're not going to use small instance types for the level of testing that we're doing. We've decided that micros are going to be appropriate. So I'm going to change that instance type there down to a T1 micro. I'll warn us that there's going to be a little bit of downtime while that instance is replaced. And it'll just take a few seconds for the production environment to go from red to green, because when the health check file goes up, not only does that file have to be pushed and get to the instance, but then the propagation of the health check has to happen. So we'll come back to that if we need to. And if we looked in the EC2 tab right now, once I've made that change to the dev environment, again, remembering that although this takes away a lot of the undifferentiated heavy lifting from you, it doesn't hide what's going on. So if we were going to see a change in what's going on from an instance point of view, we would see that happening here. So we'd see an m1.small would eventually terminate and be replaced by a T1 micro, and the m1 larges are what's running my core applications. Let's see if the production environment has got healthy yet. Yes, no, the health check should be pushed. Yeah, the health check's up, yeah. So this application, the dev environment now has gone to yellow because the instance is being replaced. So if we go back to the EC2 tab now, what we will see, we'll probably see three instances now. One will be shutting down, and one will probably be pending. Yes, so we've got one pending. In fact, the other one's been terminated already. So now, out of those three instances, the large one is the production environment single instance. The micro is the dev environment one running instance, and the terminated one is the one from the environment before we'd made the change. I'm just going to re-push out the health check for the production environment, because it should. Yes, I did add the health check. Let me just check what I called it. Not sure why that's not there. One thing I'll do before that environment gets marked as healthy is I also want to show how straightforward it is to make it highly available. So right now we've got one instance only running in the production environment. And if we go over here to auto-scaling, our minimum instance count right now is 1. So we can never have, we're not going to be able to have more than one instance in there. So we're now going to choose to have any 2 availability zones in here. So when I apply this now, the environment update is going to start. If I go to look at the details of that environment, we'll see configuration is happening. Let's just see what's going on from the point of view of the health check URL. One way, of course, I can debug this is I went into the EC2 tab. What we were saying before about being able to SSH into these instances means that if I find the production one that's relevant, and you see, by the way, now, going from 1 AZ to 2 AZs, we now have 2 M1 large instances. And if we looked at the properties for them, we'd see that one of them is in US East 1A, one of our availability zones, and the other large one is in US East 1D. So with one parameter change that we've made in the console, we've been able to make that from having 1 instance in 1 availability zone to 2, which are load balanced across 2 availability zones. Just going to have a quick look at this one here. Yeah, well, I mean, so we get what's happened here. The health check file hasn't been propagated, probably because I have done something wrong with Git here. So let's see if we can fix that. Interesting. Maybe that's what I forgot to do. So we're in a kind of slightly stuck environment here because we're just about going from 1 instance to having 2 in both availability zones. So we'd still be able to connect to one of them. Let's see if we can get to the healthy instance. Probably not because it's still not healthy. I'm going to give it a second, but I don't want to run behind with the session that's following. Fine. So the environment update has been completed successfully. So we do have 2 instances. My Git skills are making sure that I can't get that file there. I'm not going to try troubleshooting that on the fly. But we did see with the other environment how this is running successfully. The health check was propagated there. We'll fix the thing later to show you during the discussion that we have with the other solution architects. We just want to finish out by briefly talking about some of the key features that Elastic Beanstalk offers. So it supports both Java as well as PHP now. IAM support for configuring access to resources in Beanstalk. And it supports all of that kind of configuration you saw across of EC2. So managing instances, managing auto-scaling, managing elastic load balancing. And some of the best practices we'd recommend if you're going to do it. The ease with which you can deploy an application across multiple availability zones is very, very easy to do. We saw that. We had another instance launch and another load balancer. Once that health check file gets propagated, those will both be live and able to serve traffic. So you might also want to consider terminating SSL connections at the ELB to take load off your applications. And also, depending on the nature of your application, perhaps create a custom AMI if there are specific configuration environments that you've got. So if there are any questions or you want to see that final health check file up there, I'm here with a bunch of the other solution architects from New York. We'll be in the Q&A room at the end of the presentation, so please come and talk to us. We'll happily continue the demo or show you any more things. So thanks for your time. I'll hand over to Radhika for the next presentation.
Thank you, Paul. Can I just get a big round of applause for Paul? He actually coded live and demoed this live. This is not easy stuff.
Thanks.
Thank you, Paul.